This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
City University Television presents the American Theater Wing Seminars. Working in the theater. This seminar, play script, direct.
Welcome to the American Theater Wing's Working in the Theater Seminars. This is the 23rd year that we've been doing these seminars, which are coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. We're celebrating also the 50th anniversary of the American Theater Wing's Antoinette Perry Tony Awards. And we are so pleased to be able to bring you these seminars, which offer a wonderful view of what it is to work in the theater. What it is to hear from the performers, the producers, the playwrights, the directors, the designers, the choreographers, and all the people that make the theater come alive and bring the magic of theater to the audience. It is a rare opportunity to be able to hear right from these professionals that work in the theater. We are awfully pleased to be able to say that since we first introduced these seminars, there have been over 800 of Broadway and off-Broadway and off-Broadway's greats to be part of the seminar, which is perhaps one of the best archives of theatrical history that one could have as we go back through the years and see and listen to the people that have been a part of working in the theater seminars. Many of you already know that the American Theater Wing is famous for its Tony Award, which is given for the achievement of excellence in the theater. And it's a wonderful award, and it stayed pretty much untarnished through all these years. But the American Theater Wing does more than just the Tony Awards. We are a service organization, and throughout the year, we say theater to the community through the theater. We achieve that goal by bringing as much theater as we can to public schools, to high schools, to hospitals, nursing homes, and aid centers. We particularly target this to young students in high schools who are coming to Broadway for the very first time to see a Broadway show. This made possible by the cooperation of the producers and the American Theater Wing and the Board of Ed. In addition, our newest program, Theater in School, has professionals like you will listen to today that go out to the schools and talk to the students on a one-to-one basis on what it is to be a director, a playwright, and how to be a choreographer and what it takes, and giving them role models. And it's a wonderful program. And we are indeed pleased that the American Theater Wing has this wonderful relationship and respect of the theater industry that we can call upon these people to do this. We're proud of the work we do, happy to be here, and pleased indeed that the theatrical community is so cooperative. And we are indeed grateful to all of you who are represented here today of the community. I'm going to go on with this seminar, which is on the playwright, the director, and the choreographer today. And we have Brendan Gill, co-chair, with George White. Brendan is, what are you now? You're a reviewer in residence or critic in residence at?
Call me anything.
Anything. He is anything and can be anything. He is, but head and shoulders above everything else, he loves the theater and is the most knowledgeable man. And George White, who is president of the O'Neill Foundation in Waterford, Connecticut, is a director, an esteemed one at that, both here and abroad. And I'm going to turn this over to them right now so they will get into what it is to work in the theater from the viewpoint of the playwright, the director, and the choreographer. George, Brendan.
Brendan. Thank you. Names and the weights of all the players. Farthest on my right is Marlies Yearby, who choreographed the current hit musical Rent and is working on the Boston production of that same show. Boston is a small city somewhere to the north of us. She has worked all over the United States, creating work for many theater and dance companies. And next to her is Melvin Bernhardt, who is the director of The Blues Are Running at the Manhattan Theater Club. He has directed the New York productions of Crimes of the Heart, Da, The Effect of Gamma Rays on Men in the Moon Marigolds, and A.R. Gurney's Children. And right next to me is Mary Rodgers, composer of Once Upon a Mattress, president of the board of the Juilliard School, daughter of Richard Rodgers, representative of the Rodgers and Hammerstein organization, author of children's books, and mother of 5, which is impressive even to me, who am the father of 7. George?
Thank you, Brendan. On my far left is David Henry Hwang, whose play Golden Child is now at the Public Theater. He wrote M. Butterfly for Broadway, and also was the author of F.O.B., The Dance and the Railroad, Face Value, and was appointed in 1994 by President Clinton to the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities. Next to him, on David's right, is Nicky Silver, who wrote the play Fit to be Tied, which is playing at Playwrights Horizons. His other plays include Free Will and Wanton Lust, My Marriage to Ernest Borgnine, The Food Chain, Raised in Captivity, and Pterodactyls, and several more plays with very interesting titles. On my immediate left is David Warren, who earlier this season directed Tennessee Williams' Summer and Smoke. And at present, his production of Fit to be Tied can be seen at Playwrights Horizons. He has also directed 2 other of Mr. Silver's plays, Pterodactyls and Raised in Captivity. And I would like to, I think, get the puck on the ice, as they say, by starting with, just so we keep everybody on their toes, you never know where I'm going to start, but I will start with Melvin. I wanted to talk a little bit about, if you would, or help us talk about the playwright's relationship to the director's relationship to the playwright. Of course, a lot of that is chemistry. It has to do with the interpersonal relationships, very, very tricky. Would you start by talking a little bit about that? Because I think this would be a good way to get going.
Well, when I was thinking about this subject, I started out as an assistant to the director, Alan Schneider. I did not work on Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, but he had done that, and it was an extraordinary production. While I was working as his assistant, someone else had done a production that was totally different from Alan's production. It was abstract in most ways and so on. And I asked Alan about that approach to it, and he said the responsibility of a director when he is working with a playwright on a new play is to put the vision of the author on the stage. And his first responsibility is to do that, rather than to take off in any kind of interesting directions of his own. And I think I asked Kazan, Leah Kazan, the father of my generation of directors, once about the fact that he had given up directing in the theater in order to write novels. And he said he felt that as a director, his job was to get inside the head, the mind, the spirit of the author, and with his craft skills to execute a production as if the writer was doing it. And he said he finally got very frustrated because he felt he was being Tennessee Williams, he was being Arthur Miller, he was being Robert Anderson, but he wasn't being Elia Kazan. And he started to write those novels. And I think we do have a responsibility when we do the initial production.
Why do you suppose he didn't start writing plays?
He didn't, I think he said he didn't think he had those gifts.
Because the novel is easier. That's you can do anything you want in a novel, get away with murder, literally, but not on the stage. That is the hardest possible form.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting whether any other directors feeling the same frustration have tried themselves more to write plays. And I can't think offhand of anybody who has done that.
I can't either.
No, David, have you?
Several we can quote.
Well, well, let's actually, David, what has been your experience with directors? Have you had generally a relationship with one director throughout, or one that you would like to continue to direct your plays?
I seem to have no continuous relationships. I would, I'd like to, but in general, I've worked with a variety of directors, and I think what's always tricky is trying to have that moment where you meet the director for the first time and you try to decide in a relatively short period of time, are we going to get married? And somebody sets it up, it's sort of like a date, and you sit there and try and judge from how they talk about the play and how I talk about the play whether or not we're compatible. And really, on very little information, you then go into this quite extensive collaboration that's, quite intimate in a certain way. And when I was working with John Dexter on M. Butterfly, for instance, John, I think, had a method that was quite useful. He had us read the play together out loud, and he took half the roles, and I took half the roles. And that way, without having to sort of discuss the theory of it per se, we were able to see if our approaches to the characters seemed to be similar. And that was sort of a very interesting way to have that kind of date. And but in general, there's so many ways that you try to determine from a brief meeting whether or not a director is right for the material.
David, and Nicky, you guys can talk about, I mean, you have worked together a lot. What is your take on that? How both of you, in terms of, obviously you're on probably the same wavelength, would you?
Well, we also read M. Butterfly together quite a bit, and we knew it was going to work.
Well, I think I would agree with Melvin, I guess, quoting Kazan. When you do a new play, it isn't your task to have a take on the play as much as it is to help the author give birth to the play. It's a kind of midwifery, if that's how you say that word. Unlike Kazan, at this moment, to me, that's very exciting. It doesn't seem like a subordinate role. It seems like a very creative and exciting role. But I think that it doesn't happen unless the director and the writer have a kind of essential connection, a sort of aesthetic connection, and I think that Nicky and I do. So I trust his vision, he trusts mine, and we sort of like working together, which I think that goes a long way.
How long has it been a tradition in the theater, if anybody knows, that to be a director?
Not that long.
No, it's amazing.
Like
it's like there never
years.
were conductors of symphony orchestras
right.
in the old days, and then that became a new profession. The profession of director is probably maybe 100 years old,
Right.
but maybe not more. Bourbon Tree and people like that always directed themselves.
Yeah.
And in this country, that was always the tradition. And I don't know who the first director was, but it's wonderful how in America we multiply professions anyway. Right. We're always thinking of brand new ones. But the work done has to be done, I would think, with a sense of comradeship. I can't imagine it's working otherwise, unless, of course, Kazan was a very vehement personality. He was a tremendous, he could have cowed a less strong playwright than Arthur Miller, for example, who was not going to be cowed by anybody. But your method would not be to cow people.
Well, I think all of us who direct feel that this is a collaborative thing we do. You collaborate with the writer. It's very difficult for writers to take their work and hand it over, but indeed that's what happens. And then the other collaborators come in, the designers and the actors, and then ultimately the audience.
Mary, have you done directing as well as everything else?
No.
Not yet.
No, and I wouldn't know where to begin. It's an arcane activity as far as I can make it. I should think, though, that it depends a lot for a director on how much the writer is indicated. For instance, Terrence McNally in Love, Valor, and Compassion evidently had no scenic instructions at all, which gives the director either more leeway or a horrifyingly loose thing to aim at or try to satisfy.
That was true on the show I'm doing now with two things. The author and I did sit down and read the play together.
I read the play all the time with David, and I have with other directors. I sit down and I don't read with them because if I'm not talking, I'm not listening, but I just will read. I'll just read the whole damn play. I'll just sit and drink and smoke and read the whole play to them.
No, we actually, it's a two-hander, and we actually read this play to each other, and that's how we got married. The point I was just about to make.
I don't know.
Oh, yes, we had no scenic indications, except that this, from the dialogue, I discerned that this play takes place in Central Park. And the collaboration with Jim Humans, the scene designer, and Ken Posner, the lighting designer, and the sound designer, Ray Schilke, has just created a whole, it's challenging because there are different realities in the play.
But I would think that's a very stimulating challenge because you know, unlike a word from my sponsor, Eugene O'Neill, who wrote everything out, where every chair was to be. This would, I would think, give you a much more fun to collaborate that way. I mean, Marlies, I was going to say, since you are a choreographer, how do you work in relationship to the director? Do they lean on you in the nice sense or in the pejorative sense in terms of making things happen?
Well, actually, most of the directors that I've worked with tend to give me a little room, in that the way that I work, because I use gesture as a basis for the movement language, is so connected to the script that, in a sense, as I'm working with the actors, there's a bit of directorial language that goes on in getting them to connect to the movement as if it was a second language for them. So I tend to have a lot of leadway, and I tend to have to really sit close to the director in that I don't tend to go away on my own a lot. I tend to sit there even when there are scenes going on that I may not choreograph at all, because it's very important for me to know who the actors are as people, and then as they are as the characters, and then to hear the language of the director so that when I go off and begin to work, I can still, we don't bump heads.
How in the world did you learn that silent language that you go back and forth? Because that's a hard thing. It can't be taught. You have to have experienced it. Now, what was your experience?
Well, I've had a vast experience. I would say that it probably started, I noticed that this gestural language that I started playing with happened when I was in San Jose State University, and I developed this piece. I don't even remember the name of the piece that I started playing with, but eventually it became a piece called The Sometimes Crazies. I'm also a choreographer that works in the contemporary modern dance scene, so that's the basis by which I work. And I think that I really connected, that I realized that a lot of my language came from a relationship with my mother, who was a contemporary dancer in her time, or what was called an interpretive dancer of her time. And I didn't realize it until I saw myself improvising on video. And then I realized it was just like, it was like speaking. And it had a real relationship to jazz music in that way, which is sort of what she improvised to a lot, in that there was a call and response, or there was a language. It was all about language. And so as I choreographed, I just became very interested, and I call them gesture dances. And I worked a lot with contemporary writers and directors who are sort of working in alternative theater forms, and sort of that marriage of how I work sort of just fit right into it. So it was great to see it come together in Rent, which is a whole different thing.
You must have started as a baby then.
Yes.
Now, how did you
it was all in the family.
Yeah. I started off, I would say my first choreographic work was in my bedroom with some friends to James Brown. You know, and it just jumped up and started creating work that way. And then from there, I did some formal training as a youngster, and then just fought against it.
Where did you do that?
In Okinawa. It's a long history. But I traveled a lot. My father was in the service, and I'm not an Army brat. Because that's the language that's used a lot. It was actually very difficult, but exciting. And so I just have a vast experience. I did disco dancing for a while between high school and college, and made money, snuck into clubs and did disco dancing. Studied modern dance from people like Aaron Osborne, who's sort of like a Lar Lubavitch kind of, Jose Limon sort of style of work. Actually never studied jazz, but then again, from the experience of my mother, had it in my body. So found that when I would go to take a jazz class, a good jazz class, because there's not too many good jazz classes around anymore, that I could naturally do it easily.
You sound like a character in a Nicky Silver play. You ask a question and the answer comes out, Okinawa? Yes. Well, that's a very daring thing. You do that kind of thing all day long.
What kind of thing are you talking about? What does that mean?
David, you talked about when you first met the director. Is that the way it happens? And this marriage that's going to take place, this responsibility that you're turning over, is it just in first meeting, casually like that? Don't you have a say in who the director is that you
Certainly,
want?
but I mean, that's why you have these meetings. You have these meetings to try to determine who it is that I want to work with in this play, or whatever the particular situation might be. You know, obviously there's a multitude of different ways that these meetings come about, and it may be that there's someone whose work I admire and who I've always wanted to work with, and we set things up. And by the way, it's not just a matter of the playwright approving on the director. It's also the director is also trying to decide if he wants to, or she wants to get into this marriage as well. So for any particular reason that this pairing comes about in this lunch or whatever it is, that's usually where the decision starts to be made as to whether or not these two people are going to commit to work together.
Have you ever broken off the relationship once you got into it? Yes, you said?
Oh, all the time. I mean, haven't you? Yeah, you do it. It happens all the time. Now, after a few years, I mean, now I have sort of a couple. I work with David a lot, and you know, I've worked with Bob Falls. I'll probably work with him again. But the first play of mine that David directed, I had been working, like, directing my own plays and producing them myself in what's ostensibly a garage and, like, on 11th Avenue for mostly hobos and hookers. But they were a very appreciative audience because it was heated. And they were so thrilled that I had very long plays because they could just sit there in the warm. And so, I mean, they weren't really very good, but anyway. And and then Doug Abel said he wanted to produce, he runs the Vineyard, he wanted to produce Pterodactyls, and he set up, I didn't know, I was so poor. I couldn't afford to ever go to the theater. And I'd been out of school a long time, so the American theater wing that brings theater to schools had passed me by. And so I didn't know who any of these people were, so I had lots of meetings with directors. And they were much more established than I was. So they would sit down and tell me what they thought my play was about and what style it should be. And I said, well, it was really nice meeting you, and I think I left my tub running or something. And I didn't actually meet David. We committed because of a phone call. I had this list of directors that Doug Abel gave me, and I had met with several of them. One, none of you, I'm sure, saw Pterodactyls, but there's a dinosaur skeleton throughout the play, and one of the first director I met with, who's sort of an ipsy-pipsy big deal. I was impressed with her credits. And she said to me, I think you should cut the dinosaur. Well, the play is called Pterodactyls. So that was yeah, so sometimes you do. So anyway, I was in Washington directing this play at the Woolly Mammoth Theater, and I had this phone number, and I called, and I had left the fax with David's credits. But I remembered I was supposed to call him, so I said, this is Nicky Silver, and he had read the play already, and I said, listen, I said, you know, I've met with all directors, like 10 directors in the last week, and they've all told me what they thought my play was about, and I didn't really agree with any of them, so I'll tell you what it's about. And if you agree, fine, and if you don't, then that's fine, too. We can just part. So I told him what I thought it was about, and he said,
I said, all right.
He said, all right, sure. And then I said, now, and he was really insulted by this, but I didn't realize at the time, it was very bad form, because I had lost the facts with his credits, and I said, now what the hell have you directed? Who are you? And then he told me.
Well, it was embarrassing. I mean, sometimes it is this strange blind date that David described. Ideally, the writer has some sense of the director's work, so there's some context.
Had I had any sense.
had you known. But I remember feeling very offended because I thought, well, I have credits. But I loved his play so much that I sort of got over myself and I kind of recited my credits. And then he said,
"Oh, you're much too big a deal to work with me. You'll never take me seriously. You'll just dismiss all of my ideas."
That was how we got married.
Yeah. And he said, and I always say the most important thing for me with a director is a director who can yell at me and feel like it's all right, and whom I can cry in front of and feel it's all right. Because then that sort of is our relationship. He yells, I cry. So, which they don't really teach in school how to figure that out. But that's the most important thing. Because it's very emotional, and you need to know that you can. The leakage here is terrible. There's a horrible spill going on off camera. It's very disturbing to me. But you need to know that you can just have a fit.
You want to tell people what the spill is before they get really alarmed?
Mr. Hwang had an accident.
Do you remember we had an actor on the panel one time, a fairly successful young man, and he said that he auditioned directors. He would go for a part.
I saw that, and it was so offensive.
Well, but the interesting thing was that he would say to the director, tell me what you think the play is about, having read the play. And if the director had a completely different slant than he had visualized it, he thought, well, no, I don't want to work with this director because we're not going to be able to work together if we're so far apart in our thinking on the play.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, it's true in the writer-director collaboration. I actually teach directing at Brooklyn College, and my students often ask me, what do you do if the writer won't make these changes that you think he should make? And I always say, well, if you've gotten to this point where you've formed teams, you've made a terrible mistake. Either you oughtn't be working with that writer, or he or she oughtn't be working with you, or you've done something wrong. If you're not all sort of serving this play together, if you don't kind of essentially agree, if the writer doesn't trust you enough to really listen to your ideas, and you don't trust the writer enough to listen to his or her ideas, you're not really, in my opinion, a director of new plays. You don't understand the interaction. There's nothing that, I would hope, there's nothing that Nicky ever feels he can't say to me or ask me about why does the actor make that cross? Couldn't he sit earlier? Don't you think that light cue is being called too soon? Is that if he looks at a costume sketch, why green? Why not red? I mean, if we can't sort of ask each other those questions sort of in the spirit of collaboration, then I think that as a director that one should only direct revivals.
Do you change your attitude with other playwrights?
No, I love working with writers. First of all, I like having them around. In fact, when I directed Summer and Smoke, I invited Nicky a lot because I liked having a playwright around. Yeah.
Is it better with the dead playwright?
No, it's not bad. They're completely different. It really is apples and oranges. But I like being able to say to the writer, we're having trouble with this moment. What does she really want here? And the writer can say, I can sort of tap dance with an actor for 15 minutes, and then the writer will say, well, no, the character's lying. She doesn't mean that. And then the actor sort of finds clarity. I would rather say at that moment, Nicky, what is going on in this moment? My ego doesn't sort of get in the way of that. And I think if one's ego gets in the way of asking those questions and involving the writer that way, then, as I said earlier, then you should direct revivals, where you're the star of the show.
I wanted to pick up on, too, about dealing with the text, with the script. And I know that Melvin, to throw a bouquet, I know that you are really a genius at this, and in dealing with text and with scripts. How does one learn that, to deal with script analysis, to find... do you learn that? Are you born with that in terms of analyzing a play, bringing something as a director to it, other than just moving people around?
It's practice, I suppose. If it's anything, I think you just immerse yourself in the material, and it tells you where to go.
And if it's
in the
not
best
there,
of circumstances.
Yeah.
If it's not there, then you shouldn't do the play.
And how do you feel about dead playwrights versus living playwrights?
Living ones are more fun.
They're better conversational.
Yeah, that's right.
What were you before you were an assistant director?
Waiting to be...
Ready to be an assistant?
I always
were
wanted
you
to
an
be,
actor?
oh, yeah, I did some acting.
Oh, that's what I want to
You
know.
wouldn't want to see it.
All right.
No, I just, from the time I was 12 and saw the first live theater, I just knew I had to be in the theater.
Yeah. Majority of directors that have been here have been actors before, I think, more so than actors into playwrights. It's mostly actors into directors.
Yeah. You know, in the old days, it used to be... In the old days, it used to be... it used to be that you really, you got to directing via being a stage manager.
I did that.
Yeah, and a lot of, so that, and then you got the, you directed the road production, and that was how you sort of wove, I guess that this has changed a lot.
It's changed a lot now.
There are other changes, for instance, in the old days, whenever they were. Directors, I think, didn't always have the kind of partnership that you guys are talking about. You get somebody like George Abbott, and you did not argue with Mr. Abbott. And he wasn't terribly interested in what your vision of the play was. He was interested in what his vision was. And I don't think there are, fortunately, that many directors left like that. Not that George wasn't wonderful, but you have to be willing to be captain of the ship and adept at it if you take on that kind of responsibility.
Well, now, Mary, picking up, you're going into a revival of Once Upon a Mattress, and as the person that created this, do you have a say about the director, a major say? Obviously, you would. What did you bring to this? What did you look for in a director? Because obviously it's not the same go around, and also it's obviously different from a revival because people remember this, or some people do, and some people fresh. So all of those things obviously are going on in your head when you do this. You want to talk about that a little bit?
It was a little different for us because Jerry Gutierrez and I have been hoping that this show would get revived for something like 20 years. He's always wanted to do it, and he's a perfect person for it because he is a trained musician who then turned around and graduated. He was in the first graduating class at Juilliard in the acting division. I didn't have to look for anybody, and I can't imagine anybody better to work with. He's very bossy too, which is I kind of like because I don't know anything about directing, and be interesting to find out what David and Nicky feel about all of that, because I have no idea how anybody directs or what it means, and I can't even tell the difference until I see a good show and then a bad show, the same show, what a director's contribution necessarily is. I don't even go to rehearsal very often because at this point they're moving people around the stage and I'll just get in the way or not know what they're doing.
Interesting. Would you want to speak to that, David?
I mean, I've directed a couple times. I directed some of my early work, and I've directed some other plays, mostly in the Bay Area when I was younger. And I think what I basically found is that I don't mind directing, but I'm too lazy to do it. I don't really like having to show up every day. You know, it's sort of, I like sitting at home and sort of writing and, you know, seeing my kid, and, you know, that's a good life. And like right now, my show is in tech, and so they're doing 12-hour days and focusing lights. And I don't have a great deal of interest in that. And I also think that I've learned that I have sort of a better, I'm sort of conceptually visual in that I'm able to sort of create situations that I think someone who was actually visual could stage in a way that it would be interesting. But I don't know how to do it. I mean, I don't know how, I'm not very good at thinking of sets or that sort of thing. So as a result, it's best for me, I think, just to be a writer and or just as. But directing, I think, doesn't finally appeal to me.
So as a writer, how early on did you decide to be a playwright rather than a novelist or a poet? Almost everybody begins as a poet, as far as I can tell.
No, I always wanted to only be a playwright. I mean, I didn't always want to be a writer, but as soon as I got to college and began seeing some plays, I just thought, well, something, I don't know, I started to think I can do that, or I like the idea of having live people I can manipulate around. I mean, it might be sort of megalomaniacal, I'm not sure. But no other form of writing really interested me.
What was your first play?
I wrote a play about the comic strip character Green Lantern.
I saw that.
And and sent it, sent it to people. I didn't realize you had to get, rights at that point. And sent it around to theaters. And actually, this Golden Child is a co-production between the Public Theater and South Coast Rep. And Jerry Patch, who's the dramaturg at South Coast, actually wrote me a very encouraging letter. He has no memory of this, but he wrote me a letter, and it was the first sort of encouragement I'd gotten from a real theater. And so I always kind of have a special place in my heart for Jerry.
And then what? And then go on a little bit about your. Was this when you were in college? Or
yeah, that was when I was in college. And then I was home. I grew up in LA. I was born and raised there. And so I was home in LA for the summer between my junior and senior years. And I saw an ad in the LA Times calendar. It said, "Study playwriting with Sam Shepard." So I thought that's good. And I clipped it and sent it in. And it turned out to be the first year of the Padua Hills Playwrights Festival, which since then became pretty well known. But because it was the first year, there were only 2 of us that applied to be students. We both got in. And that summer I began to sort of learn about writing from my unconscious and stuff, and started to realize that there were some concerns in my unconscious that had to do with issues of my background and ethnicity and culture and stuff like that that started to come out in my work. And I wrote FOB, which became my first play, that eventually went to the O'Neill Festival and then got staged in New York at the Public. And then I sort of had a career.
And an agent?
Yeah, I got an agent after the O'Neill.
How did that happen?
Michael Feingold, actually, who's a critic for The Village Voice, said, have I got an agent for you? And I signed with Helen Merrill, and she was my agent for a number of years, and we had a very nice relationship.
Should anybody be talking about, do we want to get into the whole sort of ugly/interesting topic of what the director actually owns these days? Because that concept is changing.
Sure, why not?
So
I think it's a very important Mary.
Shirt on his back, baby. But I just want to say, before you do that I go to every single rehearsal. I'm at every minute of tech. I am at every design meeting, every note session. I look at every light bulb thread.
How does anybody get any work done?
I know, it's a shock, isn't it? I do.
What about casting?
I'm at every audition.
Oh.
But the thing is, Nicky's presence in those meetings and in those rehearsals is neither intrusive nor sort of dominating. I mean, I think one thing he always says, and I think it's true, is that he sits at home and writes alone all the time. He wants to be there when we're rehearsing. He wants to sort of be part of that process. And
that's the reward.
Yeah, it seems perfectly appropriate to me. Now, if Nicky's personality in rehearsal were
like it is now,
was disturbing to the cast in some way, then I would talk to him about it. But the fact is, it's not, and he's actually just a kind of sort of a beneficent presence in the process. And I think I like
That's a very reassuring one too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the actors feeling comfortable with him and being able to say to him, help me with this line. Do I need to say it? I feel like I'm already playing this. And if he were some kind of strange and intimidating stranger who just made sort of occasional appearances, I think we'd all feel more. We'd all, I think, perhaps be more nervous about having him around.
Well, now, Nicky, you also said that you started directing your own work, and do you think that taught you something both positively and negatively? But I imagine positively too.
Oh,
so you
positively.
know that,
It did. I mean, you learn. I mean, having worked for about 6 years in this garage in what's it's called the Sanford Meisner Theater. It has no relationship to the man whatsoever. It was simply named that so that they could have an event that would hopefully get some publicity. And they called his foundation. And they said, "Can we name it the Sanford Meisner Theater?" And they said, "Oh, all right." But it was like Judy and Mickey. We built sets. We hung. I mean, it was exactly that for about 6 or 7 years. And you learn how to do everything. And you learn when to shut up and when to talk. And well, not completely, obviously, but I mean, but it does. You learn how to do everything. I only wanted to bring up that I go to everything because you had these 2 stay-at-homes making it sound like I don't know, they move around. around. I'm there every single damn minute and enjoy it immensely. I don't like to watch the play. I can't imagine that anybody does. But, no, I don't like to watch the play. That makes me uncomfortable.
Tell me about one thing which comes up with directors all the time, which is that actors often want to make more than mere suggestions, that they really begin to think that the play is theirs. And then for the director, he has to mollify that character, that actor who is pushing a little too hard.
Yeah, but again, I don't know how you let the event become so distorted that that's happening. Obviously, the playwright wrote the play, and the actors do not write the play.
Right.
If an actor is that uncomfortable with a role, early on in rehearsal, I would take the actor aside and say, if you don't believe in this play, go find another play.
Jean Smart was saying yesterday that the moment she read the play, she knew that that character was the character she wanted to play. Yeah. She was mad to play.
Well, the only woman in it.
Well, there's that.
Yeah. I think there's something also, though, about the actors that can assist the writers in helping to find what it is that they've written in the process.
And they do. And I mean, I think Jean, you know, made some interesting suggestions, had some very sort of important questions about several events in the play. And that does help the writer. But again, that helps the writer.
Right.
If an actor views his or her job as being some kind of dramaturg, editor, then maybe they should become writers. No, not so much a dramaturg, editor, but I think that there's something incredible about the process of theater, about the process of putting a work together, that there is discovery, and that, you know, yes, sometimes you can create work and you can know everything about that work, but in the reality, most times we don't. Right. You know, most time whatever it is that you've done, whether it be that you've written it or whether you've choreographed it or directed it, is the process and the wonder of putting the work together is the process of discovering what all is there, and maybe even what is there that is not obviously there.
And I think the actor's role is really important, because most of us who write plays, we write a lot in rehearsal. We come into a situation where the play is, at the beginning of the rehearsal, we get the play to be as good as we can, but once you hear it and once you start to see it in front of an audience, obviously things change. And consciously or unconsciously, I guess consciously since I'm talking about it, I find myself sort of writing for the actors that have been cast, because it's still trying to hold on to my vision, of course, but basically the form is literary, but at the same time it's about creating an event. And the event has to do with these particular individuals who we've now decided should inhabit these roles. And if there's something that they're better at or they can do more strongly than something else, I have a tendency to then start to move the rewrites in that direction.
That's interesting.
Now that's a very, in the old days with Moliere, Shakespeare, all those people, they all wrote for specific actors. Of course, there were also companies in those days, so you knew what you were doing. Well, Moliere wrote all his parts for himself because he had a bad cough, so he put his bad cough in the play. Everybody laughed at him every time he coughed. But it isn't traditional anymore for playwrights to think, now I'm going to write a play about a certain that would be fit for a certain actor. But you can do that in the course of rewrite. Now, have you, Nicky, ever written for a particular person?
No, and I think, oh my God, if I say I think one more time to start that sentence, but I believe that it is only the foolish writer like myself who does not, because the way to really make money these days is to write plays good, bad, or indifferent for huge movie stars and get them on Broadway. And that's really where the money is, and it doesn't matter. The play might be fabulous, it might be, you know, not so fabulous, but if you write a great sort of tour de force for, you know, some Hollywood-esque glamour puss, you'll rake it in, baby. So I think I'm going to go home today and actually start that kind of project. This, like, purging my soul has been very nice, but, you know, I think it's really time to
Every so often is an exception. Ed Harris, a great movie actor, is also giving a great performance.
Oh, they usually do give great performances. But I think there's this very sort of obvious trend, you know, where, and I don't want to obviously be specific, but where plays get rather lukewarm responses, but have very grand performances in them, and usually it's a big movie star, and you know, they make a lot of money.
But you were working.
Need a typewriter.
How do you get the star of your play? The late playwright Harry Kondolian, who's a friend of mine, said, if you want to get a star in the play, what you have to do is write one of these plays where one person is on stage the entire time and everybody else just comes in and out. And so I wrote M. Butterfly.
There we are.
In Rent, you're dealing with a lot of people who have not been on stage before. How do they take direction? How do you get through to them? How are they?
I think it took a while for some people just to understand the language. I mean, we had to develop a common language because I come from a particular, it was like, the interesting thing about Rent, I think, between the collaboration of the actors, the director, and the designers, is that we all came from different worlds. Some of the actors came from, or some of the performers were now our actors, right, who came from a musical background. So they were very musical oriented. And as they looked at the music, they immediately sang from a certain place of their own passion, as singers would on stage. So I think it took a while. Michael had to discover a language that worked with all of us. And then in turn, we had to understand his language and then together sort of create new language, and so that we could all understand each other. So I think that they took the directions well once that began to happen. So we had to find, I think he had to begin to speak with certain performers like Adam through a place of music, and he attached to that immediately. Adina is another person.
How did you instill the disciplines of theater into them?
Rehearsal.
Because there is that's where it is distinctive to almost any other medium of art.
They're smart. They're all very smart in that way. And all of them, I think, had a sense of performing. I don't think that anybody has not performed. It was just what their what their form was, you know. Some, like I said, were more music background, singing rock or blues, and some were actors, and some were more dancer first, then actor. So I think all of them had a sense of discipline about performance. Then it was just about understanding that particular craft of theater.
Great job.
I wanted to...
I want to get back to Mary, the nitty-gritty.
That's just where I was about to go there, too. And I wanted to start, Mary, by saying you obviously come out of a famous, world-famous theatrical background, which, did you find that difficult to break in with Mattress because of that? I mean, how did you get that production going, which was wonderful? And also, P.S., did you have Carol Burnett in mind, or what no?
I started writing children's songs for Little Golden Records when I was 21 or 2. I mean, those were my first sort of paying jobs, which were actually for hire. I didn't ask for royalties because I didn't know any better, and you'd think I would, considering who my father was, but he knew that well.
He didn't help you out with that?
It was too late. My mother and father both would say, people will take you at the price you put on yourself, and if you keep doing these songs for $300, they'll think you're just cheap. And I said, yeah, but they'll hire me, because if I don't do it that way, there'll be 900 other people begging for the job. And I do believe that. When you're an underling, you do whatever you have to do. After doing those songs for children's songs for quite a long time, Marshall Barrow, whose idea it was originally to do a spoof of the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale, had in mind to do it with Nancy Walker. We expected to do it with Nancy Walker. She wanted to do it. This was after our preliminary thing. Yes, she would have been wonderful. But guess who said no?
Nancy Walker?
Mr. Abbott. No, Nancy Walker said yes. And we were all set, and Mr. Abbott had a production meeting, and he said, how many people, this is everybody now, the designers and everybody. Well, now I'm going to do this show, and I have about May to do it in, so how many people here want Nancy Walker in the production? And all the hands went up except George's, and he said, well, I guess I'm outvoted here, but I'm not going to have any fun if I have to do it this way. And so what do? George Abbott is the person from whom you're going to get money, or you're going to get investors, and we landed up with Carol Burnett. What a pity.
Now, picking up on that a little bit also on if you will, Mr. Abbott's contribution, And Melvin, you're on the board of, or have been on the SSDNC.
Not at the moment, but I
All
have
right, but you
yes.
have been.
Well, you ought to
And-
explain what SSD.
I'm sorry, yes, the Society of Stage
Directors
Directors and Choreographers, which is the Directors Guild, if you will.
Directors and Choreographers
Choreographers.
Union.
Union, okay.
We're actually a union.
He has a union, and the
You have a
writers
guild.
don't have a union, and I'm quite cranky about that.
Yeah, right,
You
right.
have to take that up with Peter Stowe.
Well, he's cranky, too.
What's the difference between a union?
He's always been cranky. I went to school with him.
What's the difference between a union and a guild?
Yeah.
We're a labor union. We are, in fact, a labor union, and the Dramatists Guild is an association of writers, I think, who work together but have no...
The difference is that we don't have any clout, to put it quite simply.
well...
No, a guild really doesn't have the same kind of clout. As a director and a member of that union, you have to do what that union tells you to do. You do not have to do what the Dramatists Guild tells you to do. It can only be a recommended voluntary action. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't.
You don't abide by a certain qualifications that the guild puts down?
We try, especially the people who are more successful or have gotten there, feel that it's their responsibility to set a decent example for the younger kids. But if you're 24 and you have no money and you're doing stuff in a garage, and Manny Eisenberg comes along and says, I want to produce your play on Broadway, but I'm going to give you 50 cents a week. If you're Nicky and you're desperate because nobody's ever paid any attention to you, you'll say yes. Then the Dramatists Guild is supposed to go to Nicky and say, you can't accept that. And it's often very, very tough, and it's the very rare young writer who has the balls to say, I'm going to turn this down because I believe in the strength of a voluntary union of
Actually, that
writers.
deal was hypothetical that you were just, because
Yes, but I could work that out for you later.
It sounded
We'll talk.
good.
But let's go on.
but Melvin, so how, and you know, there are times that we know we've been through this where the director has felt, look, I have shepherded this play from the beginning through from, you know, West Macedon, Nostril, Montana, rep to now to Broadway. Now the playwright wants to get somebody else, or the producer says, I won't because you don't have a name. I want to use somebody else on Broadway. And the director says, okay, that I don't like, but if that is the case, I own what, this, that, and how does that, that's really a problem now, more and more, I think. I created this idea, or, you know.
Well, what we do is always in service of the play. But just as the writer can get 50 cents in the garage, you know, if Manny wants to move the play, the director, you know, Manny can also say, but I could get Mike Nichols. And so somebody who's spent a couple of years working on a project. It's not like...
How are you protected by your guild, though, from that happening? Don't they have to give you a piece of the action the way equity now demands it for actors who are in workshops?
We have it in some jurisdictions, but not all. The problem is that before there's a producer, there is a director working with a writer. And so, you know, the contract, as it were, must be between the director and the writer.
Well, what I think a lot of people out here who are younger by far than I am need to know is that that wasn't always the case. There was a very important function for something called the producer in those days, and it was the producer who worked with the writer, and together they found the director. And the producer now has almost no function most of the time. That you can name on one hand the number of creative producers as against in the 30s, 40s, 50s, where those people made a tremendous artistic contribution to the work and functioned as a third eye.
Yes.
Yes, that was Robert Whitehead, for example.
Well,
Whitehead is
only one
of the last
one of the
remaining,
last ones.
Yeah.
And Manny Eisenberg is.
And Manny and Roger Berlind.
Yes, although I don't think
Roger
Roger would be, and he's a lovely man with extremely good taste, but he's not an active, creative participant in the theater that I know of in the way that
Kermit Bloomgarden
or
Yeah.
Wyman
or
years
someone
ago.
I think that role, to a large extent, has been taken over by artistic directors of not-for-profit institutions.
That's
Lincoln Center Theater, Playwrights Horizons, the Public, South Coast Rep. These are theaters that have artistic directors with commitments to writers.
It's a great argument for off-Broadway.
Yeah.
But the director has taken on a lot of what used to be producer function.
I think that's true.
When I started out, I mean, a producer called up and said, I've got this play, we want to open in New Haven on such and such a date, starting rehearsals 4 weeks earlier. Then we go to Washington, then we go to Boston, and New York opening is February 26th. And that was the way it worked. And the script was ready to go. Now we do a play in a regional theater, and we try to get producers to come and see it.
Well, first you do a reading at the O'Neill.
We do.
Then you do a workshop, and then you do a production at
Exactly.
at you know a first-class regional theater, and then you do a tour, and then it comes.
And then you do another regional theater
Right.
the next year, and trying to incorporate everybody's suggestions.
Right.
If you're doing all that, what's wrong with Nicky Silver taking 50 cents in order to get his play on Broadway, and then, or off Broadway, whichever, and then if it's
I'm on
working,
Broadway for 50 cents. I'm not making that.
and then say, okay, all right, I've contributed this much, and there's play and actors and all the arguments that one hears about what you get out of a play. And then, if it works, then have some kind of a standard that he must apply himself to, of a Dramatists Guild or whatever it might be. But why not have the opportunity that actors want to perform, because that's the only thing they have as an audience.
From the director's point of view, though, we are also working for 50 cents. When I did Da, we started at the Hudson Guild Theater.
Right.
I was paid $200 altogether for directing Da, and after we got reviewed in the Times, the next performance was like a meeting of the league. Every producer in town was there to see the show. And then they were bidding on the show, and we wound up doing it on Broadway. I could have been replaced. I had no guarantee that I was going to continue with the show.
Your membership meant, though, your membership in the union meant that you couldn't be replaced. Is that what you're saying?
We didn't have any of that then.
I see.
We had nothing. I couldn't have been bought out. I mean, I could have been just discarded, and I would have put all that time in for naught.
And the reverse of that is that's still true in a lot of jurisdictions.
It is still true in a lot of jurisdictions. And after, it seems to me, when you, we were lucky with Da because in the same season it moved to Broadway. But sometimes you work, Lloyd Richards and August Wilson work 3 or 4 years on a play in various venues before it appears in New York. Now, Lloyd certainly should be entitled, I certainly hope he gets, some percentage of the subsidiary rights.
Well, I think this is a very important part of the discussion, and I'd like to continue, but we're going to have to stop right now for a minute to take a breath, stand up and stretch, and then go on with this. And I think that it's one of the most important things that's come out of the playwright directors seminars, and because this is what people want to know. How how you're protected, how you're not protected, and the responsibilities of the playwright. So please, everybody, stretch, stop for a minute, come right back and sit down, and we'll continue.
This is CUNY TV, Channel 75.
We're continuing the American Theatre Wing seminars on working in the theater, which are coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. And this seminar has a panel of directors and playwrights and one choreographer here, but we're all talking about what role each one plays in the development of the play and the play that you eventually, the audience, sees. So we're going to continue that right now with George White and Brenda Gill, co-directors.
Robert Frost once said that poetry was the application of the seat of the pants to the seat of the chair, and that, in a sense that's true of playwriting. But how does one learn how to become a director? We talked earlier about being a stage manager, but David, perhaps you could talk a little bit, and Melvin, about how do you really learn? You talked about having mentors, but
right.
Now we have directing programs.
Yeah, I mean, and I think they're great. I teach in one now, as I said. I didn't go to graduate school, and I had a kind of an odd path that I don't know that I can recommend it because it was so strange, but it worked for me. I worked as a design assistant. When I first got out of college, I assisted a couple of set designers and also worked as a prop person. So I never had one of those horrible day jobs. I was always sort of in the real theater, and I learned a lot, and I worked with these an amazing generation of set designers, the set designers who are now in their 40s, sort of a generation ahead of me, like Tony Stragus and John Arnone and Adrian LaBelle. And I learned about the director-designer collaboration from the other end, which has stood me in very good stead. And then I sort of went through a period of being mentored, I suppose. I assisted James Lapine for about 2 years, and Des McAnuff. And those two men were my graduate school. And I learned by just, sitting quietly. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, I think directing is such an odd thing because you can only do it. And that's why a directing program is useful, because in a good directing program, you direct a lot. And people like, Melvin Bernhardt or whomever will come and say, here's how I would have changed that, here's how I would have done this differently, but you're actually directing.
What did you think you were going to do when you were in college? Where were you in college? Here in the East?
I went to Sarah Lawrence College and I studied philosophy.
What a terrifically difficult thing to study.
Well, everything has seemed easy since then.
And pays
but I have it to fall back on if this directing thing doesn't work out.
Make money as a philosopher.
But then how did you happen to go from that?
I also was always interested in theater. And
did you do theater at Sarah Lawrence?
I did theater also at Sarah Lawrence. Right. My focus was philosophy, but I also studied theater and, in fact, was actually directed at Sarah Lawrence. So by the time I graduated, I knew that philosophy thing wasn't going to really work out. And I had a feeling that theater was where I ought to end up. So I did graduate. I did graduate knowing. I left undergraduate school knowing I wanted to direct, which is a little unusual. I think most people come to directing a little bit later after having been an actor or a stage manager. But I sort of hit the ground running and assisted a couple of directors. Like Jerry Gutierrez was my very first job. I assisted Jerry.
How did you get that job?
I was an intern at Playwrights Horizons, where I have directed Fit to be Tied. I was a directing intern.
How did you know about being an intern? How did you know about Playwrights Horizons? How do you know where to go that first step?
It's all sort of a strange chain of coincidences. Andre Bishop, who was then the artistic director, had an assistant who was a student. Her name is Rachel Chanoff. She was a student at Sarah Lawrence, and she was sort of assisting him. And she said, "There's this apprentice or intern program, and I think you should apply." And I applied, and I spent a year, my senior year of college, and I assisted Eleanor Renfield, a director, and Jerry, and it was a very exciting time to be at Playwrights Horizons, because it was when they were doing March of the Falsettos and Sister Mary Ignatius and The Dining Room, and Krista Rang and Wendy Wasserstein and Albert Inarado were all sort of in residence at that theater, and it was very exciting. So it was a terrific move for me, and Peter Parnell. So that's how I learned.
Yeah. In terms of playwriting, Nicky, perhaps you can maybe you got involved working with David because your work has not been compared to Immanuel Kant or anybody else, but now how do you seriously? How do you?
Immanuel who?
Not yet. No, Manny Kant. Never mind.
I'm familiar with Emmanuel Lewis.
Okay, there you are. We've talked a little bit about how David got going, and you started working on your plays. Did you always want to be a playwright? Were you an actor? What?
Well, I don't know what I wanted to do. I grew up in Philadelphia, and I just wanted to get out of Philadelphia more than anything else. I mean, not that there's anything. Philadelphia is a lovely city with many fine vistas. But I think I wanted to have sex, so I left, which I didn't feel comfortable in my parents' house having. And neither particularly did they, it seemed. So I left when I was 16, and I went. I mean, once or twice. I mean, sorry. I left when I was 16 and I went to NYU to study theater, but I didn't think I would be a playwright. I didn't know what I would do. I just wanted to be in the theater. I wanted to have some career in the theater. And I studied art and I studied theater, and I was in plays. I went to the experimental theater wing, which was great. And the idea there was you did a play with Liz Swados for 4 weeks, then you did a play with Charles Ludlam for 4 weeks, then you did a play with Meredith Monk for 4 weeks. And the idea was to expose you to all these different aesthetics, and you were supposed to pick one that you liked. And I didn't. I ended up sort of smushing them all into writing. You know, and I had horrible, miserable, creepy, pathetic, wretched jobs, like, unlike classy David, who was assisting James Lapine. I was like sweeping up hair in the barber shop. It was just so grim. I mean, I worked at, you know, I had all those restaurant jobs and everything, and then eventually I worked at Barney's, which was like very glamorous to me. I wrote a play, after I finished college, I wrote my first play, and it was called Bridal Hunt, and it was this very, very mean-spirited, very, very vulgar, hard to believe really, isn't it? Play that the Phoenix Theater, which is no longer around, did a reading of, and I gave it to a friend of mine who worked there, and she gave it, she was a secretary, and I said, tell me if you think I can be a playwright, and she gave it to Steve Robman and David Copeland, who ran the theater at the time. And they said, it's going to be, prepare yourself, because this is a very dirty play for our subscribers. It's just a reading, and they were going to be very offended. And it was filthy. It was a filthy piece of tripe. And like, so like the doddering, like the sort of like Manhattan Theater Club subscriber audience, they schlepped in with their walkers. You couldn't fill the theater because you had to have like oxygen next to them. It was so frightening. And within like 5 minutes, you realized you could not be vulgar enough for these people. They adored it. And the next day, the play at the time was Two Fish in the Sky with Cleavon Little, a play I bet you don't remember that was running at the Phoenix Theater because the next day they announced that they were going out of business. I like to think I had a hand in it. So that was that. But I did get my first agent. He was I invited like every agent I could think of, and several screamed at me because they were.
How did you know about the agents? That's what I
didn't. They said they didn't know where it was going to be. The Phoenix had no theater anymore, and they had rented whatever they were doing, Two Fish in the Sky, and what a title! And it was eventually it was at New Dramatists, but they didn't. And they said. They didn't tell me. They said, we don't know how many people you can have. But I knew you had to have an agent. So I went to, like, the yellow pages or the white pages, and I sent, like, 25 or 40, a lot of invitations that I went, and I had them made look like wedding invitations. The play was called Bridal Hunt, so I had it look like wedding invitations and everything. And then they called me, and they said, you can have 8 people. So I had invited like 40 agents, and now they said I could have 8 people. Now, as it turns out, there are only like 10 literary agents for the theater anyway, and most of them were like, you know, agents, like if you murder someone, you want to write a book about it or something. There were those kinds of agents. So I had to call and uninvite several. But then they came and they contacted me, and I interviewed with them. And now I feel I've gone on too long. But what was the question? No, I'm done.
You answered it.
All right.
But I want to get back to what we were talking about before, of protection and overprotection as well by your unioning and various unioning guilds of your organizations. It seems to me that it's hard to get an agent because today everything is so stylized in a sense that you've got to go through the channels. How does a young man do what Nicky did today, or a young woman?
Aggressively. There's just... I went up to Tufts last week and talked to some theater kids up there, and one of them said, you know, there doesn't seem to be any musical theater in the Boston area. And do you know of any? And I said, no, not offhand, and asked the others. Nobody knew of any. I said, then get to New York. The thing is that you can't just sit around waiting for it to fall in your lap. I said, call up producers. Hal Prince, write a letter. Hal Prince is a terrific guy. He hires.
Will he answer the letter?
Yes.
That's what we get back to. Will he answer?
But the point is,
will
if he
somebody
doesn't answer, somebody will. Exactly the way David got there. Well, I'm not a producer, but feel free to write me because I can always use a dog walker.
There's another approach. There's another approach,
He wants the job.
If all these people want musical theater in the Boston area, start one.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
We've got to make theater happen.
Yeah.
There are no holes waiting to be filled. We have to dig the hole and then say, I'm here to fill this hole.
Yeah, well, you know, this is true. I quickly, as you know, Derek Walcott, who grew up in Trinidad and won the Nobel Prize, he came from an island where the theater did not exist, so he went out out and he trained his actors, built his scenery, wrote the plays, and directed them, and created a theater, and didn't wait around for an agent. I mean, he really just did.
But that takes money.
Well,
it takes determination.
It's your garage syndrome.
It doesn't take money. I mean, I did the first production of a play called Fat Men in Skirts at the Sanford Meisner Theater, and I think the budget for the whole show was $800. So, which I saved from my scooping ice cream cones, was my job at the time. I did graduate from college. Those of you who are in college, this is what it prepares you for. And it was $800. The same play since then has been produced many, many times over in New York with Marissa Tomei, directed by Joe Mantello. It's been in Copenhagen and Oslo, but it doesn't take money. It takes a personality that is so alienated from the mainstream of society that there is no other outlet for it.
Where did you go to college?
NYU. I'm on the Joe thing.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I think that's very important. That's a question we keep being asked all the time. It's almost like a catch-20. You can't get in, and you can't be seen, and you can't be in until you get started, and you can't get started unless you've got the card.
Well, it is very tricky for a director, because a playwright can wake up and say, I feel like writing a play today, and write a play. A director can't wake up, or it's not quite as easy to wake up and say, I want to direct a production of The Imaginary Invalid today. So there is a bit of a catch-22 when you're a young director, when you're just starting out, in that no one will hire you because you have no experience, and you can't get experience because no one will hire you. But I think, as Nicky pointed out, if you just have to do it, if you really have something to say, you will find a way to say it, and someone will hear you. I think talent does, to a certain extent, talent will out.
And as a playwright, I think it's
she's leaving.
You both are
Yes, David, go on.
No, as a playwright, I was just going to say it's important to do your research and also know where you're sending your scripts to, because with my first script, with FOB, I mean after the Green Lantern play, I sent it to several major regional theaters, and I sent it to the O'Neill. And I never heard back from the regional theaters. Right. And the O'Neill, which is devoted to the raison d'etre to some extent, is trying to find new writers, accepted the work. And then after it was done at the O'Neill, the regional theaters came up to me and said, well, why didn't you send me this play? And it's one of those rare moments in your life where you get to go, I did, and feel some satisfaction.
Yeah. We have questions here, and I know there are an awful lot of them that need to be answered, but we're going to start right now with this young lady.
Hi, my name is Jenna Esposito. I'm a first-year student at Sarah Lawrence College. I'm focusing in directing and acting. So I have a question for Melvin and David. A lot of what I've heard in my directing classes is that 90% of the directing comes from the casting. And I wanted to know from you how much you think that's true and how much of it has to do with how you work with what you have.
Shall I go?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'll join you.
All right, just correct me. I think that casting is clearly a big chunk of the work. And I say this to my directing students a lot. You have to learn to recognize what an actor is in neutral. Because that will never really go away. An actor who has no sexuality will never have sexuality. You can figure out a way to help them indicate it. An actor who's not particularly intelligent will never really seem intelligent. You can then sort of come up with ways to make that actor seem more intelligent by, I guess, dumbing down everybody around them. So it is important, but...
With morons.
Well, usually you have one or the other, I hope. But sometimes you have to sort of work, particularly in a college. I mean, I tell this to my students all the time. You have to figure out what is an interesting choice for a role. Maybe this person is in some way opposite, in some way sort of the opposite of what you would want, but can you find a way to attach that odd casting to the play in a way that would be interesting?
Does that give you...
But I think, Melvin, leap in if you want to.
Well, yeah.
Come back, Sarah Lawrence girl.
I agree completely with everything David said, and no matter how versatile an actor is, there are certain qualities that are present or not present. But I think in terms of directing, I had the experience once of doing a show with Julie Harris, and when it was on tour, Sandy Dennis replaced her. Now, these are both very talented women, very different performances, totally different, and both satisfied the needs of the play. So there is something for a director to do, given a talented performer.
Or that the play is so important that anyone could step in and do it?
I wouldn't say anyone.
Anyone is
All right. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Roberta Surratt, and I call myself a writer, and this is for Nicky. I saw your food chain, and I liked it very much, and I respected very much your ability to take high risk. Now I see that your whole life is one high risk. But did you consciously strive for that when you were writing?
No.
He's speechless. What do we do?
It never occurs to me. I don't know. I'm just being honest. You know, I grew up, I guess I was aware of the theater in the 70s, which I thought it was sort of my first, like 1970, 1980 would be the formative years of my theatrical mind. It was a nice dance I did about it. And I think the theater was much riskier then, to be perfectly honest. I think, if you look back at what was being produced and what was being seen by a big cross-section of the public, I think it was much more daring, and that's sort of where I got my aesthetic. And it never occurs to me, I don't think anything I do is either risky or safe. I don't think you can think about it. Don't you think? It's like you're so lucky if you feel so happy to have a germ of an idea. You can't go, it's too damn risky or it's too damn safe. You're just happy that something came that day. So, no, it's just an expression of your unconscious more than anything else. But I do think that formed because it was a more adventurous time. We're living in a very theatrically conservative time, I think, sadly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mary Kennedy, and I'm a stage manager for special events at the Juilliard School. This question is for David Henry Hwang. My question to you is, how did the critics affect your production, do you feel?
The critics don't affect the production itself very much. I mean, that is what goes on stage. I think it certainly affects whether the production lives or dies and whether it has a life. But, I've generally had, the two Broadway experiences that I've had, we got pummeled out of town in both cases. And one ended up being a hit in New York, and the other one ended up being a flop. So, but in neither case do I think that the out-of-town reviews changed what we were doing. We sort of knew that these problems remained in the play, and we kept working on them. And it's a lot easier, obviously, to get good reviews because, had we done so, say, with Butterfly, then we wouldn't have lost so much money out of town. We wouldn't have had to crawl into New York. But I think in terms of what we did on stage, we really tried not to be very influenced in both cases, by the fact that we got bad reviews out of town.
Does that answer it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ronald Rand. I'm an actor and a playwright. I just spent the last 5 years writing a new play about the group theater. And I've done a couple of readings here in the city, and I was wondering what is the best way to proceed now to get it produced either regionally or in New York City?
Interesting question.
5 years? 5 years?
Do you have a typewriter?
Surratt was faster. I can't imagine. It boggled. I would never. I just don't have the patience or wherewithal. How long do you have right now? My God, 5 years.
Yeah.
Didn't you run out of paper?
I don't know. Have you sent it to O'Neill?
Yeah,
I don't know. It's basically just a question of, since you've had readings of it, I assume you've invited producers and people like that. You sent it to agents. You've done all that.
Right.
Do you have an agent?
I have an agent who's interested in it. Yeah.
Good luck. I will leap in a little bit on that. Obviously, as David talked about the O'Neill, yes, indeed, submit it. Also, I advise a lot of playwrights to go to the theater communications groups. They have a major booklet that tells, it's called Theater Profiles, and that organizes, you go through there and it really gives you a profile of theaters that really legitimately do new work, or if they say that, or even if they don't say it, and you look at the plays they produced in the last 2 or 3 years, you see how many are new. That will give you an idea. It helps you organize your submission process, because then you won't be sending it to some place that only does Moliere and Shakespeare, but does new work. And that would be a way to focus your submissions.
One of the things that we haven't touched upon and is important is that when the play is running, how often director-playwright stops in to see the play and gives notes or doesn't? What, do you have a policy on that?
David, because you, M. Butterfly ran, what, 2 years?
2, yeah.
Did you go and see it a lot, or?
No, I don't. You know, I don't know if were you serious when you said you don't really like to go to performances? Because I
No,
I
but
don't.
I go all the time.
Oh.
Well, it depends on cast changes. Don't I mean? I go.
Well, when you have to go.
Yeah, and it depends. I call, say, what famous people are coming tonight. I'm there, baby.
All right, well, you don't know the guest list. What happened?
I probably would go once every, maybe once every couple months. Once it really settled into
And
rhythm,
do you
or if there was
find
a
that
cast
there's
change.
been, in a long-running play, such as M. Butterfly, do you find that there has been changes and taken?
Yeah, I mean, well, sometimes things get really sloppy, sure. And there was a case with a particular production where it's, you know, the play runs about 2:40, and after a month, it was running like 2:15. So everyone's just started, you know, and you just got it. So that sort of thing is useful, and that's why I go. But basically, I feel uncomfortable when I watch my own plays with an audience. I feel like I get this paranoia that they're going to like stone me.
For example,
Contractually, I have to see it every 8 weeks.
Really?
Unless I'm working out of town, and then if I'm working out of town, I come back in town and have to see it. I've seen it more than that, just trying to keep it on its toes, particularly because my aesthetic is, I guess I'm being told, is unique for musical theater. I have a particular kind of eye, and I'm just getting to have a strong relationship with Yasmin, who is the dance captain, and just sort of being clear on how to talk about the work. So I've seen it more often than not, but it begins to run loops in your head.
but do you find that your performers are getting away from the choreography? Is that or not? Or?
Initially, that could happen just very easily.
Sure.
It can change to something else aesthetically, particularly certain numbers like Santa Fe, that really is, the whole thing was based on breath. And it can sometimes get very sharp and punchy. They're bored, and they're dancing now sharp and punchy. So I have to come in from sometimes and just sort of, you know, begin to talk about what it is and get them back to what it is. But now that doesn't happen as much. What I come in now and see is that they've transformed it to another level, and that's exciting when I see that.
I have learned that a production will inevitably drift. And if you don't take care of it, it will become distorted. That seems to be something that you can sort of assume will happen. I was very busy with Fit to be Tied when Summer and Smoke was running at the Roundabout, and after a couple of weeks, Mary McDonnell called me and said, "David, I need help. Come back, something is changing, and I need you to look at this." And so Jean Smart broke her ankle that day, and so we had to cancel the preview, so I had the night off. And I went over to Summer and Smoke, and I was very upset. Not with anyone, because, but it had changed. Mary is smart enough to know it. I took about 200 notes. I sat down with the actors, and they were all really happy to be told again, this is why, this is what we did, this is what this moment is. If you put a huge pause in here, it completely changes the meaning of that event. So I think they do change. It was a lesson for me, and I think you have to go back.
And I know that there are people who don't go very often, and it's very shocking to me. Food Chain ran about 11 months. There were 3 Bs, 4 Amandas, 3 Ottos. Thank God, only 2 Surges and 1 Ford. It wasn't at the same time. So there was, after the first 2 months, there was someone new in a 5-character play where one of the characters doesn't speak. So there's someone new every 3 weeks, just about. It's what it felt like. I was there constantly, and it was a grind.
How do you feel?
Well, there is certainly a deepening process that happens as the play settles in. But then, and no matter how good your stage manager is at keeping the show the way you left it, the stage manager is seeing it 8 times a week and is noticing the little changes, but not noticing them when they become major. And when you start to drift off, you keep going that way, and you can get pretty far afield.
But you're exactly right. It's gradual. So
it's very gradual.
I hadn't been back for 3 weeks, and suddenly there were enormous changes, each of which was comprised of tiny little changes.
Yeah. Well, that's why you have, thank God you have really an intelligent actress like Mary, who's a particularly bright person who can see that and alert that. And you don't always have that luxury.
Right.
I'm sorry, there is so much more to be said. We really need a lot more time and continue with this. It's been a wonderful discussion, a wonderful panel of playwrights, directors, and choreographer. And this seminar is coming to you from the Graduate Center, the City University of New York. It's but one in a series of seminars of the American Theater Wings working in the theater. And today, I think it's been extraordinarily helpful, interesting, wise, witty, and just wonderful. And I'm very grateful to all of you for being here. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks, I'm glad you were there. I'm Lewis.
She does all that. I'm patient. Because I say, I always think, wow, look at that.
How was your experience?